In our meditation, I had you feeling your consciousness in the spine. You know, it's interesting. Our body is like a magnet, a bar magnet. The south end of the magnet is the lower part of the spine. The north end of the magnet is the top of the head. And the effort of yoga is to magnetize our bodies, our consciousness, in such a way as to really align our molecules, so to speak. It's more subtle than just physical molecules, in a north-south direction. When a magnet is magnetized, when a piece of metal is magnetized, you place it close to another magnet. And what makes an unmagnetized metal that way is simply that the molecules in the metal, although they each have their own, each has its own north-south polarity, they're all turned in different ways, and so they cancel each other out. When you can get them all, by the influence of a magnet, to go in a north-south direction, then you find that the unmagnetized metal becomes magnetic. Anywhere you cut a bar magnet, you'll find that the new piece of metal, both new pieces will have a north-south polarity. You'd think that if you cut it in the north half, that all of it would be north. But no matter how close you cut it to the North Pole, it will still have a south polarity and a north polarity. And the same thing with the long piece that you leave behind, north and south, because each molecule, it's a directional thing rather than a situational thing, that half of the magnet is north and half south. This thing is true with us too, that if we can learn to magnetize ourselves, if we can learn to direct all our psychic molecules, so to speak, in one direction, the amount of magnetism that we can exert will be fantastic. Magnetism is, in a very real sense, the most important thing that a person can develop in any endeavor toward success, whether it be merely physical effort, whether it be health, whether it be art, whether it be business, whether it be simply our human relations with one another, whether it be our orientation towards God, our effort to find God. You will find in life that certain people that you meet simply seem to be very magnetic, and others, they can be present at a party and you go away and don't even know that they were there. They are so unnoticeable. Some people are really, in a sense, non-entities. The difference is simply the degree, the quality of their magnetism. There can be very wrong kinds of magnetism. For instance, Hitler, when he would come into a crowd of politicians, somehow everybody seemed to get the message and they would all fall silent. He was a man, regardless of his evil qualities, he was a man of tremendous magnetism. It was an evil magnetism, but he did have it. This is how it was possible for him to become a leader of millions of people. You cannot become a leader, you cannot become successful, you can't even accomplish anything really well without this quality of magnetism. Magnetism in the sense that all your energies are directed in one way. Magnetism in another sense, that when you have your energies directed in one way, like electricity, and this is another kind of magnetism. You send electricity through a copper wire, and it sets up a magnetic flow. And according to the strength of that flow of electricity, so will be the force of magnetism. When you drive your car under high-tension wires, if you have the radio on, you notice the crackling effect that you get? It's not the same when you drive under ordinary wires going to somebody's house. When there's a very strong flow of electricity, then the magnetic field will be much greater. We had an interesting experience that way out at 29 Palms, where we had a retreat. And for many years, we didn't have any electricity there. Finally they got it. And you know, it was a strange thing. There was a marvelous peace in that house. But after electricity was put in, somehow it wasn't as much. I don't think it was the psychological effect of it. It was just something about the place didn't seem to be as peaceful. I've noticed, and many other people have said that they've had the same experience. When I sleep with an electric blanket turned on, something about it tenses me up. It isn't a fear of its catching fire and so on. That doesn't enter my mind. There is something about the magnetism of the electricity going through those wires that, being that close to my body, it interferes with the magnetism of my body. And being into yoga, I'm sensitive enough to different kinds of magnetic current for it to disturb me. I feel all sorts of tensions in my body that aren't there as soon as I turn it off. The interesting thing here, from the standpoint of our human magnetism, is that the same principle applies. When the flow of energy in your body is strong, you become strongly magnetic. When the flow of energy, as we have wireless impulses, radio impulses and so on, when the flow of energy from your mind towards any object is strong, similarly you set up a magnetic flow. Now, every physical law has its basis in spiritual law. There is not a separation between the material and the spiritual worlds. If you have a material law, you may be sure that it's an outcropping of something deeper. The law of karma, for example, is expressed in the law of Newton. For every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And karmic law acts in the same way. When you send out a particular kind of act or thought, you get that kind of result. So also with the laws of magnetism, they have found already that magnetism is not just limited to metals. They've discovered, for example, in these very interesting experiments at Northwestern University with snails that, I think I even mentioned this to you, didn't I? That the snails act in response to magnetic influences that heretofore people used to think were limited only to metals. Our whole nervous system responds to magnetic influences from the poles, from planets, from other people. These magnetic influences reach into very, very subtle levels, very subtle realms. For example, if I send out a loving thought, I'm going to get love back. If I send out a failure thought, in strange ways, I'm likely to fail, particularly if that thought is strong. There is a story of a man in the Himalayas who was looking for a wishing tree. And finally he found this tree and sat under the tree and said that he wished for a castle. And suddenly this castle was there and very beautiful grounds around it and so on. And then he said he wanted to have the grounds surrounded by lovely gardens, and so it was so. He wanted to have beautiful damsels peopling the place. He wanted to have an army. He wanted to have lovely tapestries and paintings and furnishings. All of these things were immediately so. And he went around this palace, examining it, enjoying its beauty, and he got downstairs and he came to an empty room. And there, the window was open. And because he was still out in the jungles of the Himalayas, he was right there where all the wild animals were. And he heard a tiger roaring not very far, just outside the palace precincts. And he thought, my goodness, the tiger's just out there and there's no guard outside this window and the window's open. What should happen if the tiger should jump in this window? I'd be helpless. And just as he thought that, he forgot that he was sitting under a wishing tree. The tiger materialized and jumped in the window and ate him up before he could do anything about it. We are all, in a sense, this story is told in India to illustrate the fact that we are all sitting under a wishing tree, and continuous thoughts in any direction, even if they be failure thoughts, will attract to us the objects of those thoughts. Success thoughts, again, will gradually build up the quality of success. Yogananda had a very interesting experience in this line. He had a painting that he wanted done of his guru's guru, Lahiri Mahashai. And he got one of the best-known painters in Bengal to make this painting. And after it was finished, he was not satisfied. Although it was artistically good, the painter hadn't been enough in tune with the spiritual consciousness of Lahiri Mahashai to capture his eyes. And so Yoganandaji said to him, "Tell me, how long did it take you to master your art?" And the man said, "It took me 20 years. Yogananda was very surprised. He said, "You mean it took you 20 years to convince yourself you could paint?" And the man was really angry at this. He was not expecting this kind of a response at all. He said, "Well, I'd like to see you learn to do as well in twice that length of time." And so Yoganandaji said, "Well, give me a week." And this painter was just furious. He thought he was being deliberately insulted. So he walked out without saying anything. But Yogananda understood this principle that we are talking about here. He put his mind in tune with the idea of being a painter. Now, any thought that you have, even inspirations, really depend upon the quality of your magnetism to draw that kind of consciousness to you. If you can really persuade yourself on deep levels of your mind, not just superficially, that you can do something, you'll be surprised how much power you can put forth into doing it. He started out, and the first efforts he made were very far from what he wanted, but bit by bit he got it closer. By the end of the week, he had a painting that was very good. And he'd never painted before. And he had it hung up and had somebody call this painter. And the painter came and he saw this thing. He said, "But who did that? It's much better than mine." And then Master came out and he said, "You want to know who did it?" But the thing is that it was a principle he was trying to point out to this painter. It wasn't boasting. That really what we have to do if we want to do a thing well is not just master these skills, the techniques, and so on. The main thing you've got to do is get into that consciousness. Again, on a completely different level. Here we are living in an age in which people are worried sick that we might get into war, that we might blow ourselves up, that we might destroy everything that we have worked for as a race to build civilization and perhaps return to the caveman state or perhaps destroy man as a whole. We're worried about it. We're trying to create laws that will help to protect us from the terrible finality of the bomb. And yet it seems as if the more we worry and the more we work, the more we veer towards disaster, not peace. We can't create peace just by laws. I can't be peaceful if I'm going to be merely trying to set up rules to keep myself in check, but in my heart I'm still having the consciousness of anger. I can't create peace among two people if I come to them and say, "Now, get peaceful, be peaceful, don't fight, don't get excited." Why, they're likely to be more excited, aren't they? I was kidding up at Ananda this weekend. I was checking people's practice of Kriya, and there was one young woman there who was sort of nervous as I checked her, and so I said, "Get relaxed," like this, and of course she laughed because you can't get relaxed when anybody says anything like that. If you want somebody to be peaceful, if you want somebody to be relaxed, you're going to say, "Be peaceful, be relaxed, be calm." If we want peace in this world, the first thing we've got to do is get peace for ourselves. We've got to find peace in our hearts and send out this magnetic wave of peace if we want to draw people into the harmony of our peace. And otherwise, our very worrying about peace is likely to get us farther and farther away from it because we're creating more and more peacelessness in our consciousness. The kind of vibrations that we send out have a magnetic power that will draw to ourselves the very thing that we think about. There was one man who had a failure karma. No matter what he did, he failed. He seemed to be jinxed. And he came to Yogananda, and Yogananda de-jinxed him. It was the brother of a friend of mine. Everything he did from then on just turned to gold. It was amazing. all Yogananda did was help him to get that kind of thought in his mind so that it was a success thought, and then he found things worked. I found in my work at Ananda, we've overcome impossible odds up there. It's just, many times it's looked as if the whole thing would just collapse. And just by determination, we've always managed to come through. But I found sometimes people wanted to work with us who were born losers. And I found I just instinctively kept them away because I felt we can't afford at this time to have that kind of consciousness. Later on when we're strong, we can help them. But we can't afford to have co-workers who are going to be sitting around waiting for the ultimate collapse of the whole venture. And by this determination and confidence that it would work, apparently impossible odds have been overcome to the point where now it really looks as if it's going to be not smooth sailing, but it's going to be much, much smoother than it's ever been in the past. In your own work, too, don't allow yourself and don't surround yourself with others who don't allow themselves to have calamity consciousness, calamity Janes. Don't allow yourself to be a calamity Jane. Have in your mind the thought that I can succeed. It sort of reminds me of the time when William the Conqueror landed in England, or perhaps I should say on England. He fell flat on his face. As he got out of the ship, he tripped as he was landing on the soil of England and fell flat in the mud. And there was this gasp of horror that went through the whole forces that saw this terrible omen. First thing our leader does is fall on the country that he's trying to conquer. And William stood up and he said, I'm so determined to conquer this land, I've grasped it with both my hands. And everybody felt good, and they went on and they won. And you know, there's a lot to that consciousness. Don't allow your mind to say it can't be done. Say, with God's grace, anything can be done. And you'll be surprised to find how in strange ways this works. Did I tell you about that time when I was in college and I had this thought that if you want to be lucky, you should go out and meet luck halfway? Did I tell you about that? Well, it was really an interesting period in my life, and it's worth sharing with you. I had this feeling that I don't know, it must have been some karmic memory, because I'm sure I've done these things before, but something came into my mind that luck is not just an accident. If you want to be lucky, don't sit around waiting for it. Go out and meet it halfway, but then it'll meet you halfway. And I found that it worked in fantastic ways. I wanted to go to Mexico. I didn't have any money to go. I didn't want to spend the whole summer working to make the money to go, and I wanted to get rich quick so I could go there and spend the summer there. And my parents never gave me money for those things. It was always for me to work it out. And I didn't want to rob a bank, and I wondered how I could do this. So I looked in the college yearbook, and there were a number of essays being offered there for various prizes. One was for $100, and wow, that was a lot of money, I thought. And $100, all I had to do was write an essay, and then my heart fell flat. It said, all you have to do is write an essay on the basic principles underlying the government of the United States. And I thought, my God. I ate my lunch in my history class, my American history class, and all I knew of, all they ever teach you of American history is these stupid embargoes and amendments to the Constitution. I don't know, they seem to have an unwritten law to make it as boring as possible. All these exciting things that have happened in our history, and they just cloud us with all these thoughts to the point where you think, what's the use? Well, I thought, well, who would write an essay on that? And I thought, well, that's right, who would? And I checked, and I saw that nobody had won the essay the last year, and I checked back several yearbooks, and nobody had won the essay for several years. So I thought, well, heck, if no one's going to enter in this contest, I could at least try. And so I didn't bother with going into a long scholarly thing about what the basic principles were. I assumed that everybody knows what they are. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. What else? So I thought, well, instead of trying to go into all our beginnings, let's just see how these principles are working today. They didn't say what I had to do with that topic. So I wrote 3 chapters, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Property. And I showed how by our pursuit of property, we're getting away from life and liberty, and to say nothing of happiness. So it was sort of interesting, but anyway, nobody else entered, so I won. And then I won a poetry contest for $15, but then that was what I wanted to be anyway, was a poet, so that was no surprise. And with this money, I set out to hitchhike to Mexico. Got one ride from Philadelphia to Mexico City, 3,000 miles. And the fellow that drove me, his company was financing the trip, so he said that he would just write me off as a second driver, and that way he could put me on his expense account. And I stayed in his house in Mexico. I made this $115 last all summer. And just everything worked out like this. I got a reputation for being fantastically lucky. And then I had gone to Mexico with a false expectation. I had thought that, well, here I am surrounded by a nation of people who think that the only thing in life is to get a job and get married and raise a brood of squalling children and worry about the grocery bills and finally die. And I thought, is this what life's all about? Just the hopeless compromise with our ideals. We want joy, we want happiness, we want inspiration, and all we end up thinking about is the grocery bills and nagging one another and scolding the children. Is this what life's all about? I thought, I don't want to get married. I don't want to raise a family. I don't want to get into a job. I don't want all these boring humdrum activities. What do I want? Maybe what I want is a life of adventure. And so I set out to Mexico with this idea that I would find my fulfillment in adventure. Well, this is what I say was the fallacy. Because after I had spent a few weeks having a high adventure with all these wonderful new people, I suddenly, or gradually I should say, came to realize that all of them were people who were getting married and getting jobs and raising their children and worrying about the grocery bills. And it was the same setup there as here, and probably it was the same all over the world as here in this respect. And besides that, I found worst of all that I was the same person. That really the person I had been trying to escape was myself, and I had dragged myself down to Mexico City, and I could have the same headaches and moods in Mexico City as I could have in Haverford College or Scarsdale, New York, or anywhere else. And I realized from this that this idea of adventure was a big fallacy, and that really whether you get married and raise children or not isn't the issue. It's what you do with your own life. That things are not more wonderful somewhere else simply because you were there when you go there. And you are the thing that has to be changed, and if you can change yourself, you can have a sense of wonder going into your backyard. You can have a sense of adventure and beauty with your own family. It's a question of changing yourself, and the whole world changes. And until yourself is changed, no matter where you go, you can be in the most exciting places possible, and still, it'll be the same old world. Reminds me of the World War II, when they were fighting in Africa. And these Moors, here the Germans and the Americans were shooting at each other with cannons, guns, God knows what else. And the Moors were driving their carts between the line of fire. And people said, my God, what are you doing? You'll get killed. They said, why should we? We're not fighting. This isn't our war. So here they were surrounded by all this excitement and turmoil and history-making stuff, and they were just still in their own little things that didn't exist for them. They were just worried about getting their hay in or whatever it was that they had to do to get to market and so on. And all this adventure didn't exist. In fact, you won't even see adventure until you have the capacity to see it. You won't even see wonder until you have the capacity for wonder. And the whole thing that we need to change is ourselves. So I realized this, and so I began to get sort of pessimistic and negative, realizing that I'd barked up the wrong tree, thinking, well, then what is the right tree? Of course, I found it finally in yoga, but during that time of feeling pessimistic, I started getting sick. Everything started going wrong. When I changed my consciousness again and got back my usual buoyant attitude, everything started going right again. You'll find it to be true in your own life. This magnetic consciousness that we send out, if we send it out with a great deal of strength, then it creates a magnetic field, just as an electrical current does. And according to the quality of your thought, you will draw that kind of results. It's a very, very important principle because your whole growth as a human being depends upon it. But now, here we come to two things. When you have an electrical current, you can also have a resistance to that current. When you have resistance, you build up heat in the electric wire. The magnetic flow isn't so great even though you've got the same amount of electricity going through. Similarly, with your own bodies. It's not just the amount of strength that you're sending out towards something. It's not just the amount of energy that you're sending into your body. It's also the amount of resistance that you are placing to that current. Resistance in two ways. One, the resistance of opposite desires. The molecules canceling each other out so that there's no magnetism. Or the thought, I want this, contradicted by the other thought that it's difficult, or I'm not sure that I really want it, or others have tried and failed, or who am I to think that I can do it, or all these sort of negating thoughts that we have in our minds that paralyze not only action, worse than that, paralyze the very thought that could generate action. Whenever you have in your mind this thought, another very interesting experience happened to me along that line, the same period in my life. I was studying Greek in college, and I really lost interest in college. In fact, I'm a dropout, I'm afraid. I shouldn't say that to you. But if you want to be a yogi or a poet, be a dropout. There's no use in college. But if you want your degree for something, then of course it's fine. But I've learned a lot more since I left. The course in Greek, I just didn't seem to come to class somehow. It just didn't seem to happen. And when I did come and tried to translate a passage that was given to me, I might recognize words like and the, and philos and adelphos, because my college was near Philadelphia, so I knew that philos was love and adelphos was brother. But as the exam time came near, the professor said, well, there are some people who might as well not even appear for this exam, and everybody would look at me and laugh. And I thought, well, by golly, no, I'm going to pass this exam. And so a week before the exam, I picked up the book, and I thought, I just can't. And every night, I would pick up this book and throw it down in disgust, not even looking at it, just looking at the title, and that was bad enough. Well, the night before the exam, I suddenly, and here's how I hit upon this principle, I suddenly, in the desperation of the hour, realized that I had to do something desperate. And I came upon this marvelous principle. You know, in our minds, whenever we study, I was doing it to an exaggerated degree before. There's a part of our mind trying to take this subject to us, and another part of our mind saying, oh my God, Greek, that's foreign. It's Greek to me, as everybody was saying. The poor professor, he'd heard it from every class for the last 35 years. When everybody with this original, this thought that he was being original said, it's Greek to me, I remember this hollow groan that came out of him. But it was really Greek to us, and to me. And when you have that thought, you're pushing it away with your mind as hard as you are pulling it to you with your mind. And so I said, you're a Greek. Well, you know, it's amazing how my whole consciousness changed as soon as I thought I was learning my own language. The whole trend of my mind was one-directional. And so I thought, thinking of myself as a Greek, I was sort of remembering my own language. You know, it's interesting. If you put yourself in tune with the consciousness of people who speak a language, you can pick it up quickly. I've done this because I speak about 9 languages, and I find languages do come easily. That was a plus. But with this Greek, I just put myself in attunement with the consciousness of a person who speaks Greek, and so naturally Greek came easily. For 2 hours I was studying, and then my brain was just reeling. I couldn't think anymore. And so I put the book down. Well, the next morning, we had been studying the New Testament in Greek. Still with this consciousness of buoyant faith and so on, I picked up the Bible in English and read one chapter, hoping that would be the right one. Well, it was. We were told to translate from the Greek into English that chapter. And other things just happened right. There were 2 people in that class only who passed, and I was one of them. It's a principle. If you use it, you'll find that it works. If instead of in your mind thinking, oh, I can't do it, and therefore pushing it away, if instead of that you understand that really it's a question of magnetism. You know that story of the great imposter? It's not a very edifying story because he was an imposter. But the fantastic thing is that acting this role and really putting himself in tune with the roles that he was acting, he became successful. For example, he pretended to be a doctor. He didn't know anything about doctor, but he ended up being a Navy physician on a ship. And somebody got something stuck in his larynx and he had to perform an operation. Well, he hadn't been to medical school. All he wanted was the glory of being a doctor, but he put on such a good act that he actually began to think of himself as a doctor. And with this consciousness, of course he must have boned up a little bit, but he performed such an excellent operation that he was given a citation for it. The skill that you can develop if you really convince yourself you can paint, in other words, if you really convince yourself that you can do something, you will find that you send out that kind of magnetic consciousness that will help you to be able to do it. It's really astonishing. This is what we do with the practice of yoga. There are 2 ways that we can help to develop this kind of magnetism. Well, 2. Why do I say 2? Robert Benchley said the world is divided into 2 kinds of people, those who divide it into 2 kinds of people and those who don't. So there are really more than that. But 2 I had in mind, and then suddenly I thought of others. 2 being this. 1, that just as a magnet develops, a piece of metal develops magnetism by being in proximity to a magnetized piece of metal. So if we are in tune with or close to people who have magnetism of the kind that we want, then we can develop it. This is why if you want to be good at something, for God's sakes, don't mix with losers. Mix with people who are good at that, and you will find that you develop that. You'll notice you'll notice this especially in artistic spheres. Some people get into a milieu of people who love to sit around talking about the great paintings they're going to do someday. And all they're really doing is going to bars or taking pot or sitting around just dreaming and never accomplishing anything. And you'll find that the people who get sucked into that kind of environment don't do it. If you want to be a good painter, stay away from that kind of people who love the romance of painting and mix with people who are good painters. It's interesting, look at their hands. You'll notice that the really good painters never have artistic-looking hands. They look like the hands of peasants usually. You can see that they've got art in them, but they're not that long, tapering, sort of sensitive kind at all. They're usually square and short-fingered and practical. And if you want to be good at something, you'll find that you should mix with the people who are practical. They don't talk about it, they don't dream about it, they don't seem so much like artists, but they're the people who get out and paint and make a success of their painting. And it's true in every field. Don't mix with the people who just like to talk about it. Mix with successes, and if you can't mix with successes, there's even more that you can do about it. You can take their photographs, you can read their lives, look at their photographs, meditate on them. Really, there is something to this voodoo idea of sticking pins in a photograph and affecting somebody, but we're working in a different way here. We're trying to take the pins out of the photograph. We're trying to draw influence from that person instead of influencing him through the photograph. Through looking, it isn't that the photograph has any magnetic qualities in itself. It's that seeing his eyes, seeing the picture of the person, you gradually find it easier to attune yourself to his state of consciousness, which is magnetic in a particular way, and therefore you too can develop that kind of magnetism. This is true especially in the spiritual path where masters are able to help us consciously. But even if you want to be a mathematician and surround yourself with thoughts and so on about people like Einstein, pictures of them and so on, you'll be surprised how you can, even from a distance, draw to yourself some of their magnetism. What you are doing in the process is simply aligning the molecules of your mind in a north-south way towards a particular kind of magnetism. But in the long run, certain kinds of magnetism can be developed, and yet only to a certain extent. They become sidelines from our total nature. A person can develop very strong physical magnetism, for example. In yoga teachings, there are a lot of things on this subject. For example, I know of a man who had such a quality of animal magnetism. He was a short, slight man, but an animal trainer. And he would go by the cage of a lion, and the lion's hair would stand up on end. Why, the lion, with just a little flick of its paw, could kill the man. He wasn't even strong. And yet the lion was afraid, because this was the kind of magnetism the man sent out. I don't say that's a good kind of magnetism, but it's a kind of magnetism which can be developed to some extent very strong, and then it becomes a dead end, because the body is only a part of our nature, and until we can learn to align ourselves in a complete north-south way with our highest center up here at the top of the head, that is to say, until our magnetism can become completely spiritual, we will find that after reaching this dead end, there's no further that we can go with it. We will not have fulfilled our total nature. We may go in the direction of evil and become very magnetic in that way, but then that's as far as we can go. That's why good ultimately is stronger than evil, because good aligns us with the magnetic power of God himself, whereas anything less than that is aligned with lower degrees of power. But there's an interesting story. Somebody that I know of, through a friend who knew him personally, it's as close as I can bring it, went to India and learned certain principles of yogic magnetism. He came back and he went to the Los Angeles police force and told them that these teachings could be very useful to them in their work if they could just learn to become more magnetic. If he used that word or something else equally kooky sounding to the Los Angeles police force, I don't know, but they couldn't have been less impressed. They are, after all, not necessarily very mystically inclined. I remember stopping a policeman down there one time to ask him how to get somewhere, and I said, could you tell me how to get somewhere? And his motorcycle was going a little bit too loudly for him to hear me well, and he said, who did what to who? Like this. I said, never mind. But anyway, he said to these people that he could teach them to become more magnetic and so on. And they were just laughing at him for a fool. So he said, well, if you really feel that way, come and try to hit me. Well, they thought this was fun. This they understood. And so, let me not put down our police force. It's perhaps not fair. But anyway, this they did understand. And so they came up to him and tried to knock him down. Well, the interesting thing was that they got just about 6 inches from his face. Each one of them, in turn, just passed out at his feet. He left 15 bodies sprawled on the floor and walked out. The magnetic power, I've seen some of these things, and it can be fantastic. The power of the energy in your body is the power that ultimately created the universe. And if you can learn to master this, but in a spiritual way, then there is really no limit to the amount of magnetism that you can exert. Now, I said in one way we can develop this by being in tune with people who have it. They won't lose it. We merely get, a magnet doesn't lose magnetism, does it, when you put it next to another piece? Tell me, does it? Somebody who knows physics here. Does a magnetized piece of metal lose any magnetism when you put it next to a piece of metal that isn't magnetized? It doesn't, does it? Okay. It doesn't spiritually either. I know that's true. you put yourself in tune with his level of magnetism, and you draw magnetism to yourself. Now, however, well, I'll get into that a little bit later. There's another way that you can develop your own magnetism, and that's through your own practice of yoga. You can help to align these molecules in yourself through your breathing exercises, through trying to bring the energy up the spine, through trying to aspire completely upwards in your meditation, concentrating deeply at the point between the eyebrows, awakening this Kundalini power, as we're going to be talking about it in a couple of weeks. Anything that directs your energy upwards is going to help align these molecules in yourself. In fact, the best thing to do is both of these things. The help of a guru is considered essential, and the help of your own self. Otherwise, I remember Yogananda saying to some of the disciples who were just spending their time sitting around talking, he said, don't think that just by living here that you're going to get there. You've got to receive. You've got to make the effort yourself. He said, there are plenty of rats and mice living in the canyon on this property that aren't advancing spiritually. You've got to make the effort. I've seen a lot of people say, oh, my guru's going to do it all for me. I don't have to do it. Don't kid yourself. We've got to do everything we can, and then we draw that divine power. But there are other aspects to it, too. For example, in your body, if you eat foods that are that clog the system, then you create obstacles to the flow of energy in your system. It creates heat in the system. This is why in yoga teachings they say that certain foods are heating. As you'll read in my book, Yoga Postures for Self-Awareness. Certain foods have a demagnetizing influence on the body because they clog the flow of energy. They either constipate one or they're full of toxins. This is one of the reasons why yogis say don't eat meat. Another reason is that meat already has a wrong kind of magnetism to it, the magnetism of fear and so on with which the animal is killed. The feeling of intense anger that it has, people who eat that meat draw some of that consciousness into their own bodies. And food that's been prepared, by the way, in a loving spirit will have a much more magnetic quality than food that has not. Food that's been cooked with anger, for example, has another kind of quality. So you women, when you get married, or if you are married, you have a perfect built-in excuse for getting your husband to take you out to dinner. Just say, I'm in a mood tonight, and therefore I shouldn't cook for you. If he's a yogi, he'll understand. But if you eat food, remember that food has a magnetic quality. Cooling foods like yogurt and fresh cheeses and fruits, these are very magnetic in the system. In fact, yogis even go to the extent of saying that different kinds of fruits have different kinds of magnetism. That if you eat bananas, they'll help to make you more humble. And can you imagine if the next time somebody boasts, you know what to do, just give them a banana. And they say that pears help to make you more peaceful, and cherries make you more cheerful, and oranges give you energy, grapes help to develop love and devotion, and what? I don't think that grapes are an aphrodisiac. I think it's more of spiritual love. But if you ferment them, then they become the opposite kind of love, or I should say the other kind of love. And strawberries are sort of like oranges. They tend to give you energy. Everybody says, what about apples? And I don't know the answer. Darn it. One of these days I'm going to find out the full information, and then maybe I can answer that one.